Earlier this week, we covered a disturbing story originally broken by the Associated Press. It involved a 2019 case in which a doctor in Canada was suspended for forcibly sterilizing an Indigenous woman. After speaking to the journalist who broke that story, we felt that it was necessary to continue to ask the very important question, how is this still happening in Canada? For the case in question, a woman was admitted to a hospital in the Northwest Territories for abdominal pain and for the removal of a painful cyst on her right ovary. And despite objections from medical staff in the operating room, the doctor removed both of the victim's fallopian tubes, leaving her sterile. We found out in our previous interview that the doctor did not lose their medical license and was only suspended and required to attend ethics training. Well, joining us now to discuss the case in question and what seems to be the continued practice of forced sterilization in Canada is the lawyer for that victim, Mr. Stephen Cooper. Mr. Cooper, thank you again for your time today.
My pleasure.
So how did the doctor in this 2019 case get away with just a suspension of his license? How did this case play out, sir?
You'd have to talk to the College of Physicians and Surgeons. I mean, from a perspective of professional discipline, lawyers, doctors, accountants, engineers are largely self-governing. And I'm no expert on the regulation of doctors in Canada. And as shocking as it is, they do have the authority to do what they did or didn't do in this case.
Shocking indeed, sir. Now, unfortunately, this isn't the only case of forced sterilization that you're involved in. So what can you tell us about these multiple class actions around this in Canada and the dates of these sterilizations? Is this 2019 case the most recent we could look at?
It's the most recent that I have any formal knowledge of. We are getting information that this isn't the last instance in time. Certainly isn't the first. We, our firm, in conjunction with some colleagues in British Columbia and in Ontario, have multiple class actions, as you've indicated, in Alberta. In British Columbia, we know of other cases in Saskatchewan and Manitoba. I don't think the numbers are there, but certainly the circumstances are there in the three territories to similarly pursue class actions. This has been going on, unfortunately, for time immemorial in the colony that is Canada.
And reading some of these cases, I've learned that Indigenous women are sometimes coerced into sterilization or into signing a consent form that may lead to sterilization. So can you tell us a little bit more about this practice of coercing people into serious procedures and how this is legally possible in the medical field?
Doctors, like lawyers, have a special position in society. We go to them for advice. We trust them. We trust their advice. It's done in a variety of ways in the sense that the doctor is often giving information that is biased, that is intended to reflect their own agenda or what they perceive as societal agendas. Sometimes they give information that if they don't do something, then something worse will happen. There was certainly some suggestion in this case that the doctor attempted to cover his tracks by indicating that, well, maybe something could happen in the future. Why don't we just take it out? My client said no. And in the case of other sterilizations historically, the position of government, as represented by government doctors, by people in uniform, RCMP officers and others, is such that the individual woman, often on her own, and sometimes with her husband, and sometimes men, less frequently as far as we know, would be put in a position of feeling intimidated. And our government has a long, sordid history of intimidating the Indigenous population here.
A very long history indeed, sir. Now, what are some of the legal protections for Indigenous people in particular when it comes to coerced sterilizations or coercing people into certain serious procedures and just forced sterilization overall? What are some of the legalities around this that we know of?
Well, there wasn't much until very recently. The government was very slow to pick up the gauntlet here and now has passed a specific modification, an amendment of the Criminal Code to specifically deal with this type of situation, but it didn't exist in 2019. Certainly didn't exist in the 40s and 50s when this was far more common. We'll have to see over time whether that amendment will modify the thinking. I mean, quite frankly, when you're dealing with things like criminal charges, people don't tend to commit crimes expecting to get caught. I don't care if that's a bank robber or a physician who decides to forcibly sterilize somebody without their proper consent. Hopefully the potential sanction of the criminal code will reduce. I doubt it'll eliminate. I don't know what it's going to take to eliminate the problem, but it hopefully will reduce the occurrence. The problem, of course, is that it's now a section in an act that may or may not be investigated, pursued, and result in prosecutions. let alone convictions. And we already know, for example, in Yellowknife, in the case of my individual client there, that without a complaint, the RCMP has told us that they won't proceed. And our client is intimidated enough to have complained about the doctor to the College of Physicians and Surgeons. And we think it's unlikely that she'll find it within herself to put herself through what is a much more difficult scenario, which is being a complainant in a crime.
It seems to be a very multi-layered issue here, Mr. Cooper. Thank you again for joining us and clarifying this information for us. Thank you.
My pleasure.